Hello friends and welcome. I'm Sara Lihz and I have a spooky shaker birthday card for you today. I don't know about you, I love all the Halloween dies, but I don't give Halloween cards, so we're going to turn it into a birthday card. And we're starting with the half pint jar dies and stencil. There's a stamp set that goes with this too. I'm not using that today, but I'll show you a bonus card at the end that uses it. And then we are also using this You Donut Scare Me add-on that goes with the circle shape card that has dies in it to make a donut, but we're not making a donut. That You Donut Scare Me set is maybe my favorite piece from this entire release because there are so many amazing things in that set that you can use for other things or that you can reimagine and use in different ways. And so that's kind of what we're going to do today. I have a piece of pale purple cardstock that has more of a bluish tint to it. And I'm using a warmer purple ink and I'm just going around the outside. I love this mix for Halloween. And then I have some black shimmer ink that I will bring around the very outside edges. I don't want it to get too dark. We're going to cut most of the middle out of this. And I want to make sure there's room for my sentiment that still has some lightness to it. Then once I get done ink blending all the way around, we're gonna add some splatters onto this. You can see that little bit of shine right at the edges. That's that shimmer ink. I thought I was splattering with like a glitter pen, but it's not a glitter pen. It's just black ink apparently, but it's cute. It's fine. It's Halloween. It sounds great. Next time though, I might look for some glitter. I'm gonna set that aside to dry, and then we are gonna just stencil and die cut the jar lid. I am looking for the etchings that show me that this is the front of the stencil. If you have it upside down, it will stencil just fine, but the die won't line up with it correctly. So I am ink blending like a medium blue ink onto medium blue cardstock, and then I will shift my stencil. I will say I would love to show you me lining it up, but I had to get my head right over the top of it because the ink is so close to the cardstock color. And so there's really not a lot to see. If you use the stamp with the stencil, super easy to line up. When you're using just the stencil, look at the far right where the lid meets the sort of fabric. That is the easiest place to line it up. This last piece of the stencil is really more of a highlight. I chose to skip that this time. And then I used the die. I dropped it slightly lower than you're supposed to, and it looks like the ink went all the way to the edge. I have a spider web from that Donut Scare Me stamp set, and then here's my jar that I've cut out. And I'm just trying to figure out where I think I might place things as I'm putting my card together, because I need to cut out that piece in the middle. I'm going to use this one right here. The center of the jar is attached to a die that cuts out the jar to help you get it in the right spot for the stencil. So I am just going to tape that to my card base, and I'll show you how I worked around that. I have a top folding black A2 card. It could be side folding. It doesn't really matter for this card. And I'm going to line up my top panel and then the jar frame. And then I'm going to glue this leftover piece onto the background of my card. That's the inside of my jar. It's going to be a shaker. Later on, I'm going to decide I want that to be gray instead of purple, but it's really important to do this step now before I go putting acetate on that front panel. So I have two pieces of acetate. They're ever so slightly smaller than A2. I'm using a really heavyweight acetate. It's actually shrink plastic, kind of like Shrinky Dink film. This one's from Graphics. It's very, very sturdy as long as you're not trying to heat it up with a heat tool. So I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the back of my panel, and I will lay that all over the back. It's going to make it a little bit sturdier, a little bit stronger. I push away from the center. So if the glue is going to ooze, it oozes away from my shaker window. Then I'm going to take my black jar, attach my lid or sort of the cloth and the lid, and then I will inlay that right over top of the acetate. I could have, with a different die set, just cut out the middle, but that wasn't really an option for this one. So putting that heavyweight acetate, or really any acetate behind it, gives me somewhere to glue the actual jar and frame onto. These are flames. There are little dies in here that let you turn this into like a Yankee candle. And we're gonna make them into some spooky eyes. I couldn't not see it once I had done this. And so I am coloring in the centers of those flames. To make 2 eyes, I had to cut the flame twice, but that means that one of them had to be flipped over. And so you're getting the sort of backside of the die. So I just stick both of them between 2 pieces of heavyweight scrap cardstock and run it back through my die cut machine. And then you can't really tell which one was the good side and which one was the back side. Then I have these little scars that are part of the Frankenstein accessories in the donut die set, and I'm adding those onto my jar as well. I find that tweezers work particularly well for something like this where I'm arranging a face or a spooky eye or scar or whatever, because I can see it before I actually press it down onto my card. Then I'll flip it over and just trim off anything that's hanging off the sides. Before we actually attach this to our card, we've got to add some teeth. There are 2 sets of teeth. They cut 3 a piece and they go in the center of the donut. That's so goofy and funny. But I was like, we could totally make this like a monster chomping jar. I tell you what, friends, I'm more of like a cutesy Halloween kind of person. It shocked me that I had so much fun with this card, and my boys, 2 little boys, think that it is amazing. So I started by putting teeth into the corners of the jar, and then I just started arranging things. I wanted the teeth to kind of overlap. Some of them are going down below the edge of the jar. I'll trim those off, but I wanted lots of different sizes and angles of teeth. I wanted places where they were getting really wonky and weird, and I'll just trim off those excess. This was a little bit easier when I finally got rid of the scrap paper, because then I had more contrast. So again, I just like to add glue to the teeth and then pick up my jar and I will just lay it down onto the die cut that has glue. That way I can see exactly what I'm doing, exactly where it's going. The wet glue lets me wiggle it a little bit as well. And I'll just keep adding a few more until I feel like we got a full set of some weird, creepy chompers. I've got one more for the bottom, and this one is like a tooth coming out from the side of another tooth. It's just, I don't know, it's just weird, and I like it. Then I'm going to go ahead and add the eyes into the center. I'd kind of waited on those because the ink I used to color them in was very wet, and I didn't want that to smear onto the bright green outline of the eyes. Later on, we'll add a pupil to it as well. I wasn't sure that was necessary, but I think it really brings it to life. These pieces are meant to be like the red veins of the eyeball. You can turn it into a giant eyeball donut, but we're going to turn it into a crack on the jar. The die for this cuts a ton of pieces, so I just saved the rest of them. I'll probably do this again. Like, I just think there's a lot of ways. You might use this not even for Halloween something, but just a cracked glass something. And I'm going to glue those on. I like to add my wet glue and then tap it off on the back of my hand or on some scrap paper just to make sure the glue isn't going to ooze out. It's a really fine die cut, but I don't want it peeling up. So I just get rid of the excess glue and then lay that right down onto my acetate. You can also just set the piece aside to let the glue start to set up a little bit before you place it on your acetate. That also works really well. Here, I'm adding glue all over the back of everything on that jar, right? My hand is not big enough for that. So we'll just bring in a little bit of scrap paper. For this one, you could use a silicone mat. There's lots of ways to do this, but if I'm feeling impatient, I'll do it this way instead of just waiting for glue to dry. Once I get that on there, I can start working on my sentiment. And here's the fun part. There are new Simply Sentimental Halloween stamps and dies. And so we're going to use the Have a Bangtastic, and then instead of saying Halloween, we'll say birthday, right? I have friends who love Halloween so much that if their birthday was in April, they would be thrilled to get a card like this. The Have and are separate stamps. And so after I lined those up, and I was really happy with the way they were aligned, I stamped and heat embossed probably a dozen of them, so I don't have to line them up again next time. For the Simply Sentimental birthday, I have this scripty one, and I put some Rip and Stick sheet. It's double-sided adhesive behind it, which makes this so quick. So I have a black shadow, and then the white birthday. So it sort of mimics the heat embossing that I did earlier. I'll just press that down and it's done. You could add glue behind that, and I would just tap off the excess glue from behind the birthday, but this was easier. Then I'm going to add some glue, and I want these kind of wonky and going at weird angles. I think it fits, especially when our jar is so like straight and centered in the middle. And then once we get all of these adhered down, we can start working on the shaker. So here's the gray piece that I liked better. It just creates a little bit more contrast for the inside of our shaker jar. So I will add glue over the purple one and just add that right on top of it. The embellishment mix I've chosen is called non-toxic, and so it really needs double thick foam tape, or at least of my foam tape, which tends to be pretty thin. So I just layer it right back on top of itself, and then it's really easy to trim down and line that up. It's why you see some little torn pieces on my background. I've gone all the way around the edge of that gray section, and I'm just going to take my anti-static powder tool and brush that along the edges to try to keep my bits from sticking. I've got it in my scoring tool just to create a right angle, like a little edge to put everything against, and I'll put my embellishments in here. Some of the poison bottles are really thick clay bits, and I didn't want things to get kind of wedged between the back and the plastic. So I took those out, and then I'm going to add in some black sparkle spots. I love the sparkle spots. If you haven't looked at these, they are ever so slightly see-through and glittery. They're in black and light blue, light pink, white, like there's a bunch of them, and they're super thin. So if you don't like super bulky shakers, you can use that instead and get away with a pretty thin layer of foam. You could have, at that point, just have added that front panel with our jar onto the back of the card, and you would have a shaker with this monster jar. But I want a little mechanism that will slide in and out. And so that's why I put just clear acetate over the shaker beds. This green panel is about 3 inches wide, and by the time we're done trimming it down, it's going to be about 5 1/4. And I've just come around with some green ink, and I want it to be a little bit splotchy and uneven. Then I'll take my black shimmer ink over some of that as well, splatter it with some of our black ink, and that will tie it in with the rest of our card. Then while I wait for that to dry, I'm going to come back to work on the eyes. They just didn't feel spooky enough. So I penciled in pupils first because I wasn't risking just going for my silver gel pen and then it didn't work, right? And I'm just going really slowly and trying to make it so that they're equally wide. And I love the extra pop of shine that adds on there. Once I'm done with that and my green panel has dried, I have 2 1/2-inch strips of black cardstock that I've layered up 3 times. I want to make sure there is room for that green piece to slide in and out fairly easily, and that it's not going to get stuck or feel like it's not moving the way it's supposed to. So I am sticking the green panel just kind of sitting in the middle so I know where it is. And then I am smoothing out the glue on these pieces because they're laying on acetate, and I don't want to smear that glue anywhere that might mean my green panel gets stuck. So once I have those on there, I think they're in the right place. They're not quite touching that panel. I will remove it, and I will make sure that that glue is really starting to dry before I go moving on to the next step and adding other pieces on there. I set that aside for about a half hour, and when I came back, I could start working on finishing up this pull tab. So I'm just eyeballing how far I want that to stick up out of the top of the card. It's not going to fit in an A2 envelope, but I'm not really worried about it. I can always use a bigger envelope. Then I was feeling brave. I must have been channeling my inner Carrie Rhodes, who regularly freehand stamps when a card is almost done. So I went for it. I mean, I guess it was just the green panel. It didn't stamp perfectly. So I just brought in my micron pen and I will fill in the P of pull. Then I will begin adding my final elements to my card. I'm adding glue on those 3 supports. There's one on either side, one on the bottom that create a little chamber for our green slider panel. And I am being very thin with my glue, but I'm also putting it everywhere because the top panel, the purple panel, has acetate on the back of it. So I want to make sure it's not going to ooze out of there either. Then I can slide this green piece right in between the 2 pieces of acetate. And that finishes up our scary, spooky birthday card. My friends, I hope you enjoyed this. I want to show you a bonus card. On this one, I used the half pint jar die set again and the stencil, but I also used the stamp and then the Hocus Pocus gnomes. And I just love how cute this is. And I am super excited to use this jar for some Christmas themed projects as well. If you've enjoyed this video, my friends, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more inspiration.